The woman they dismissed was the one they'd been trying to impress for years. And they didn't even know it. What would you have done in her place? Let us know in the comments section below. The auction house manager didn't look up when she walked in. Greg Stanton scribbled into his ledger with the kind of pride that only came from assuming the room belonged to him. He wore his authority like a tailored suit, sharp, smug, and pressed at the collar. Behind his rectangular glasses, his eyes scanned down the bidder list, checking for known power players, names with money, names with weight. That's what he cared about. That's all he'd ever cared about. "Let me guess wine's too warm again," he muttered without turning around. The intern beside him, nervous and pink-cheeked, stammered, "Actually, Mr. Stanton, someone just walked in. She wasn't on the list." Greg turned, only slightly interested. "Describe her." "A black woman, mid-30s, I think, wearing green silk, heels, and carrying a really expensive-looking portfolio." That made Greg straighten a little. "What name?" "She didn't give one. Just walked in, said she was here for the Avery lot." Greg didn't need a name, not really. He had years of experience reading people like ledgers, and what his brain registered wasn't the woman's confidence or the subtle luxury of her outfit. All he saw was someone who didn't fit the mold he'd created in his mind for today's serious buyers. He closed his ledger. Let's make sure she finds the right door. Trinity Reeves took slow, measured steps across the marble floor. She didn't rush. That was the mistake people made when they felt out of place. They rushed, they looked down, they made themselves small. Trinity never did that, not anymore. She wore the confidence of a woman who had fought for every inch of ground she walked on. Her emerald dress shimmered in soft folds around her, a contrast to the dark, structured leather portfolio tucked beneath her arm. Each step clicked softly, rhythmically, as she moved through the space like she'd built it with her own hands. She had. In a way, no one greeted her. No one offered a glass of champagne or asked if she'd like to view the private catalog. Instead, there were the usual looks, the ones she'd seen since her 20s. The sideways glances that started at her heels and ended at her face, followed by a quick tightening of the mouth. Discomfort disguised as professionalism. She scanned the room. Antique mirrors, crystal lights that danced above restored Victorian columns, and glass displays filled with relics most of these people didn't understand. Just bought, traded, displayed. Her eyes stopped at lot 27. The Avery bronze, 18th century, Urawa origin. No one in this room could pronounce Ife without checking their tongue first, but they'd bid on it like it was a weekend game of polo. Trinity moved closer, eyes locked on the artifact. She hadn't come to observe. Not today. "Excuse me, ma'am." The voice came from behind her, polite, firm. She turned and saw the security officer, tall, heavy-set, the kind that radiated tension just by standing still. "We're going to need you to step outside," he said. Her brow didn't move. He glanced toward the entryway, where Greg Stanton stood with arms folded, smiling like this was a training exercise. "We've had a concern. This is a private auction. Invitation only." Trinity's voice was low, calm. "And who raised the concern?" Greg answered before the guard could. "I did. I don't recall inviting you. This is a highly curated space, Miss Reeves." He blinked, still not connecting anything. "Right. Miss Reeves, I'm afraid we'll have to ask you to leave before the bidding begins." A few heads turned. A few murmurs started. Trinity watched Greg like she was studying a weak seam on a priceless canvas. She considered explaining, considered pulling out the email thread with the board, considered the signatures, the confirmations, the nods of approval. But she didn't move, didn't flinch. Do you want to check with your board chair first? She asked evenly. Greg smiled, patronizing. I don't think that will be necessary. The guard's hand lightly touched her elbow. It wasn't forceful. Not yet, but it was enough. Trinity looked down at the man's hand, then up at him. She nodded once, slowly, and she walked. Outside, the air hit her with sharp coolness. Trinity stood still on the front steps, her face expressionless, her fingers tapping against the leather of her portfolio. Yeah, she could have walked away. She could have gone home, but she didn't. Instead, she pulled out her phone, thumbed through her contacts, and tapped one name. Olivia, it's Trinity. He just had me removed, yes, from my own building. A pause. Trinity's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. No, don't tell him anything. Walk back in. She looked up at the windows of the auction house, where the laughter had resumed and the elite patted themselves on the back for their taste in culture. Trinity Reeves took a deep breath, turned back toward the doors, and walked slowly toward them. A gift. This time, the building was ready, but it didn't know she wasn't just here to watch. She was here to claim. No one stopped her at the door the second time. That's the funny thing about power. When it arrives in silence, it's often mistaken for absence. But when it returns, even the marble seems to hum. Trinity didn't wait for permission. She walked past the front desk without a glance, past security, now frozen with confusion, past Greg Stanton, still flipping through the guest list like her name might magically appear if he looked hard enough. The room hadn't changed, but the eyes had. She felt it. The ripple, like a record scratch beneath the murmur of high society conversation. A few gasps, a few eyebrows raised so sharply they nearly touched hairlines. Whispers crawling across rows of seats, like shadows sliding down a wall. Trinity Reeves was no longer the woman at the edge of the room. She was the center. Olivia met her halfway, lips pressed into a tight, furious line, a tablet clutched like a weapon at her chest. I tried to get here before they embarrassed themselves. I told Greg. It's fine, Trinity said, brushing past her with a nod. It's better this way. Greg's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The confidence that had been welded into every inch of his posture melted under the gaze of the auction house's true owner, not the sponsor, not the donor, the owner. He managed to stammer, Miss Reeves, I had no idea. No, she interrupted, voice calm but clear. You didn't. Then she turned away, not because he didn't deserve a longer stare, but because he wasn't worth one. The auction was still going. An auctioneer stood at the dais, rattling off the details of Lot 23 like nothing seismic had just split the room in two. The bidders played along, offering half-hearted raises of their numbered paddles, while sneaking sideways glances at Trinity as she moved down the central aisle, her heels echoing like punctuation marks against the polished floor. She didn't sit. Instead, she approached the stage, stepped just beside the auctioneer, and leaned in. He turned, surprised, startled, but when she whispered something in his ear, his eyes widened in recognition, and he immediately lowered the gavel. Ladies and gentlemen, he cleared his throat, we will take a brief pause before proceeding to the next lot. The room murmured, not out of protest, out of curiosity. Because every person in that room could feel it now. Something had shifted. Permanently. Trinity stepped up, not to a podium, just forward, enough to be seen, heard. For those of you unfamiliar with who I am, she began, voice steady, tone unimpressed. My name is Trinity Reeves, and yes, I was removed from this building 10 minutes ago, because some people in this room assumed I didn't belong here. She scanned the faces, not accusing, just observing. She was done trying to convince people of her right to take up space. I'm not here to shame anyone, she continued. "You've already done that yourselves." She silent. "But I will take a moment," she said, unfolding the leather portfolio she'd carried in with her, "to remind you what this auction house represents, what it was built on, what we claim to honor." She held up a document. An original acquisition form, dated 50 years prior, bearing the name of the first black collector to ever make a 6-figure donation to this institution. "My grandfather," she said softly, and a few people blinked, shifted in their chairs. "This building bears his name. The East Wing, Trinity Reeves Gallery. That was his. The artifacts you prize so highly tonight? Several of them were part of the private collection he spent decades restoring, preserving, and donating when no one else cared to keep the histories intact." Someone in the second row lowered their gaze. "My name isn't just on the deed. It's in the DNA of every sculpture, every frame, every auction record that passed through this house. I didn't buy my way in. I built my way in." She paused, let the weight of her truth settle like dust on glass. "I wasn't going to speak tonight. I planned to observe, see how far we'd come." She smiled then, just a little. But it wasn't warmth. It was clarity. But watching how quickly I was erased at the door told me everything. She turned to the auctioneer. "Please continue. Lot 24 can proceed." And just like that, she stepped down. No mic drop, no dramatic exit, just a woman reclaiming the silence that had once tried to bury her. Greg stood frozen behind the chairs, half shrunk into himself. Olivia gave him a look that didn't need words, just walked past. Trinity sat now, third row, aisle seat, right where everyone could see her. The rest of the auction passed in a strange state of reverence. No one raised their voice. Bids came slower, with more thought. No one wanted to be the one who misunderstood anything again. When Lot 27 came up, the Avery bronze, there was a visible shift. The same piece that had drawn Trinity in from the beginning now stood under the lights like it knew it had been part of something larger. The auctioneer paused, looked directly at Trinity. She nodded. "No sale," he announced. "This piece has been removed from the bidding per institutional request." A small wave of confusion swept through the crowd, but no one questioned it. Later that evening, while the last few guests shuffled toward the catered wine and parted with performative apologies, Trinity stood by the bronze. She ran her fingers not on the piece itself, but near the plaque, near the name of the tribe, near the story that no one else had asked about. Behind her, Greg approached cautiously. "I didn't know," he said, too quietly. "No," she replied. "If I had, you didn't." He swallowed, ashamed. "Is there anything I can do?" She turned to face him now. "Yes," she said, locking eyes. "Start learning the names you don't know before they walk into the room." Then she walked away again. Not because she was angry, but because she'd already said everything she needed to. The storage room smelled of cedar wood and old paper. It wasn't glamorous. No champagne, no chandelier light, just shelves stacked with catalog binders, climate-controlled cases housing forgotten relics, and the low hum of the preservation system. But Trinity preferred this space to the auction floor. She stood beside a linen-covered table as the curator peeled back the layers protecting an 1840s portrait. The subject, a young black girl with her hair tied back in braids, sitting beside an ivory harp. Her eyes, strong, unblinking, seemed to look straight through time. "It's called Harmony Interrupted," said the curator. "Unknown artist, but we traced it back to a freedwoman's estate in Savannah. Took years to get it authenticated." Trinity didn't answer immediately. She stared into the painted girl's eyes like they were a mirror. Then she stepped forward and set her hand down gently on the edge of the table. I want this one for the Trinity Reeves exhibit, she said, front and center. The curator nodded, silently scribbling the accession number into her log. Behind them, Maya leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. She watched her sister without saying a word. It had been 12 hours since the auction, since Trinity stood in front of a crowd of collectors and erased the erasure, and since the art world whispered her name with equal parts reverence and regret. I hope you know what you did yesterday wasn't just a moment, Maya finally said. Trinity didn't turn. I didn't do it for the moment. I know, Maya replied. But it's going to follow you. Everything does now. Trinity looked back over her shoulder. That's the point. They were quiet after that, both staring at the painting, two women in their 30s, daughters of a legacy no one saw coming. Trinity pulled her phone from her coat pocket and tapped open her inbox. 73 new messages. A mix of press requests, apology statements, donor inquiries, and 3 emails from the Smithsonian asking to discuss future collaborative opportunities. She skipped them all and opened one marked private inquiry. The message read, I was at the auction last night. I've been hiding a collection passed down to me for years. My grandfather acquired it during his work abroad. I'm ashamed of how it came into our family, but I think it belongs with someone who knows what it is. Would you meet me? The name at the bottom made Trinity blink. She didn't know the woman, but she knew the last name. Langford, as in Langford Holdings, one of the largest estate brokers in the country, the family that had, just 10 years ago, auctioned off entire sacred textile collections from West Africa without blinking. Trinity stared at the screen. What? Maya asked, stepping closer. Trinity handed her the phone. Maya read, frowned, and then looked up. She wants to meet you? I don't know if it's real. She said she's ashamed. That might be the most honest sentence in the whole thing. Trinity thought for a moment, then nodded. Set the meeting. They met the next morning at a nondescript brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. No staff, no art handlers, just a woman in her late 40s wearing a cable kinnet sweater and holding a ring of keys like they weighed too much for her fingers. I'm Evelyn, she said, shaking Trinity's hand lightly. Thank you for coming. The apartment was quiet, the kind of silence that came from too many years of secrets. Evelyn led her into a sitting room where 4 long crates rested against the wall, covered in linen and secured with brass clips. My grandfather traveled often. Egypt, Nigeria, Ghana. He always came back with things. No one asked questions back then. No one cared how things left their country of origin. She paused, looked down at her hands. But I always knew, she said. Even when I was a girl, these weren't souvenirs. They were stories, stolen ones. Trinity stepped forward, unhooking the first clip slowly. Inside the crate was a carved wooden mask, detailed with real gold leaf. Its surface was aged but uncracked. Trinity whispered, Aklan royal lineage. Evelyn nodded. My grandfather never even researched it, just said it was pretty. One by one, they opened the rest. A ceremonial drum from Mali, a beaded robe woven with cowries, a scroll sealed with wax that had cracked over time but was clearly of legal origin, a record of land ownership, entirely in Yoruba script. Trinity stared at it like it was glowing. Do you know what this is? Evelyn asked. Trinity nodded slowly. It's evidence, it's memory, it's... Everything they said, we lost. Evelyn crossed her arms, trying to keep her voice steady. I don't want this staying in our family. I want it to go to someone who won't hide it. Trinity raised her eyes. You want to donate it? I want to return it. Back at the Foundation's headquarters, the boardroom was tense. Trinity sat at the head of the long mahogany table, flanked by Maya and two senior advisors. Across from them were 5 trustees, 3 white, 1 black, 1 Latino, each flipping through copies of the report she'd circulated that morning. "You're proposing we divert $2,500,000 0 cents from the restoration budget to create a repatriation fund?" one of them asked. "I'm not proposing," Trinity corrected gently. "I'm informing you. It's already moving forward. But I'd like your full support, not just your signature." The Latino trustee, Mr. Rivera, leaned forward. "You know I respect what you're doing, but pulling money from physical restoration, that's going to delay several projects." Trinity met his eyes. "The artifacts will still be restored, but returning stolen items, especially the ones we've had for years, isn't a disruption. It's a correction." A long silence. Then, "Where will they go?" asked the black trustee, an older woman named June who had once taught art history at Howard. "Back home," Trinity said simply. "We'll partner with historians, embassies, and cultural centers to return them to their nations of origin. And not just in the shadows, in public, with ceremony, with transparency." Maya nodded. "We don't just want to tell better stories. We want to make the story right." June smiled. Just a little. "It's long overdue." Trinity looked around the room. "This fund is more than symbolic. It's active, alive. It says that we don't just hold history, we answer to it." And with that, the board voted. Unanimously, the first brick fell quietly. Trinity stood at the back of the press room inside the newly renovated Trinity Reeves gallery, her fingers grazing the curved edge of a plaque still covered in deep crimson velvet. Behind her, the floor buzzed with camera flashes, soft murmurs, and the metallic shuffle of folding chairs against polished oak. Every seat was filled. A young intern approached, cheeks flushed with nerves. "Mr. Reeves, we're ready when you are." She nodded once, then stepped forward. The stage wasn't high, but it felt like standing on a mountaintop. Years ago she'd watched others hold this position, usually white men in designer suits, reading off names they could barely pronounce, treating legacy like an accessory. Now all eyes were on her, and this time it wasn't because they didn't know who she was. It was because they did. Trinity leaned into the microphone. "Thank you all for being here today." She paused as the room hushed itself. "I was asked this morning how it feels to be back in this building after what happened last week." A few chuckles floated through the room, more nervous than mocking. "And the truth is, I never left. I was always here, in the archives, in the curation rooms, in the storylines you skipped over." She looked down, then back up. "But today, I get to stand here, as your director, as your founder's granddaughter, and as a black woman who now decides what stories get told on these walls." Applause broke out before she could finish. The velvet cloth slid away as she unveiled the new wing's name, the Trinity Reeves Center for Cultural Return and Creative Futures. The applause swelled again, real this time, lasting. From the corner of the room, Maya wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, then lifted her phone to take a photo. Trinity caught her eye and smiled, just a little. Later, as the crowd trickled into the gallery space, wine glasses clinked, programs were handed out, and people wandered through the bright corridors, reading captions that actually meant something, that acknowledged where things came from, who made them, who lost them, and who would never be forgotten again. Trinity moved quietly between clusters of guests, nodding, greeting, occasionally stopping to explain a piece. Then she saw Greg. He wasn't near the front, didn't try to pull focus. He stood near the back wall, beneath a display of returned Benin bronzes, hands folded in front of him, reading the full caption. He didn't look up when she passed. He didn't need to. The message was already there, in every detail. She didn't approach him. She didn't need to do that either. A week later, Trinity sat across from a group of high schoolers in the gallery's education wing. The chairs were mismatched, the lighting softer. No press, no suits, just teens in sneakers and hoodies, some taking notes, others spinning their pencils. "What do you see when you look at that mask?" Trinity asked. A girl in the second row raised her hand, tentatively. "It looks like it's watching you, like it remembers something." Trinity nodded. "It does. It remembers where it came from, and now it's back where it can be honored." A boy with a paint-stained backpack tilted his head. "But why would someone take that in the first place?" Trinity didn't sugarcoat it. "Because power, when unchecked, thinks it has a right to everything, even what doesn't belong to it." The room was still for a moment. "Do you ever get tired," someone asked from the back, "of having to explain this to people all the time?" Trinity let out a short laugh. "Yes, but I'm more tired of not explaining it, of watching others explain it wrong." One of the students leaned forward, a notebook in her lap. "So, what made you keep going?" The question hung in the air longer than the others. She looked around the room, at their faces, their curiosity, their fire, their truth. "I kept going," she said slowly, "because someone had to. Because my grandmother cleaned galleries where no one ever said her name out loud. Because my grandfather gave away his entire collection before a single museum would hang his portrait. Because I saw rooms filled with history but no memory. And I wanted more than that." She smiled. "And because I knew one day people like you would walk through these halls and see yourselves, not just in the stories we tell, but in the ones you'll write next." That night, the gallery closed quietly. Trinity walked alone through the exhibit one last time, before the lights dimmed. She stopped at the Yoruba scroll, now displayed with glass protection, its translation printed beneath in 3 languages. The caption didn't list the collector. It listed the origin, the history, the journey home. From her bag, she pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten on aged paper, signed in faded ink by her grandfather, dated the year before he passed. It had been found tucked in the back of one of his journals. "To the one who will continue what I began, if they don't invite you to the table, build your own. And if they try to keep you out of the house, buy the house. Then open every door you find." Trinity slipped the letter behind the display frame, just out of sight. Not for the public, just for her. The lights began to shut off one by one behind her as she made her way toward the exit. At the front desk, Olivia looked up from her screen. "You're still here?" "Yeah," Trinity said, picking up her coat. "Just making sure the building remembers who owns it." Olivia grinned. "It knows now." Outside, the night was cool and steady. Trinity stepped into it, chin lifted, portfolio still under her arm. But not heavy, never heavy. Behind her, the gallery lights stayed on just a little longer than usual. Just long enough for someone passing by to stop, look up, and see her name lit in gold above the doors.